Hey guys,
Thank you,
welcome
Derek.
back to the Family Posture Podcast with your host Michael,
And Rob.
and apparently the voice of Siri in Zoom here. This is still throwing us off. Sorry guys, if you have any questions about that, refer to the last episode. So today, Rob, we're going to talk about something that we are incredibly familiar with. I mean, it might be a topic on us. We're going to be talking about celebrity pastor, the culture of celebrity pastors.
Yeah.
And if you can be humble while you're being a celebrity pastor. And I think we have all of those boxes checked, you and I.
Yeah. I actually add some stuff to my coffee to help keep me humble. So
yeah. I mean, we both run, huge ministries, have book deals. I mean, my phone, I just turn it off because there's so many calls coming in. And it's just like, yo, like, guys, Justin, Selena, like, Brad, stop texting me. I don't have time. Like, it's just one of those things where it's just really hard to, get things done.
I would make references like that, Michael, but I don't know any movie stars at this or artists. Like I'm that guy who somebody's like, oh my gosh, did you hear this person's new song? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, maybe
I don't know who that person is.
Yeah, I don't even know
Kanye who?
I don't even know who sings Christian songs. I've heard the songs, but I mean, I don't know who they are. Yeah.
So in all seriousness, today we are going to be talking about celebrity pastor culture and if one can be humble while being a quote unquote celebrity pastor. This came up also as this whole series this month is in the stories on Instagram through a series of different questions and topics that we were talking about. And the question came up, can somebody be humble as a celebrity pastor? Because there are some people that kind of get thrust into that in a way that they didn't intend, whether like a book they write just does incredibly well and then everybody kind of knows their name, or they preach this sermon that wasn't meant to be this big thing, but it becomes this pivotal thing in their ministry. So it comes down to, within this celebrity pastor culture that is pretty predominant within Christianity, though luckily it seems to be dying pretty well. Though that might be even pushed back on. But like, can you be well known and still be humble within Christianity? And how does that look like? Now, again, I think we should preface, even though I started off this podcast in a sarcastical way, we don't know a whole lot about this. We're talking about this from the outside. Like, we're just looking at
outsiders observing.
Yeah, this is me trying to tell Dave Ramsey how to spend his money. This is me trying to tell Michael Jordan how to play poker and how to play basketball. This is like this, just so you kind of get the concept. This is me being like, yo, Spurgeon, I know you think you know what you're doing, but let me tell you how to preach. Like, so like this is where we're at.
Bro, there weren't 3 points there, Spurge.
So just so we're aware of who's talking about what here, like that's kind of the comparison. So
however, we do have a pretty weighty thing to help us maneuver
called the Bible, or the Bible as some people call it. I call it the Bible. So
can I just start by saying that I think that the phrase celebrity pastor culture is so idolatrous, and like the fact that that's even a thing is such a joke to me, and it's offensive, honestly. Like I'm not like I said,
I think it's dying, which is nice,
but it's like what a joke we are to think. And I don't know. How did it come up? How did the question come up?
To be honest with you, I completely forget at this point.
Okay.
But by the time we're recording this, I'm a month and a half removed from these questions.
Oh, okay.
Because of our recording schedule. Just so everybody's clear, like our recording schedule is really far away from when this topic first came up. It probably, if I had to guess, it probably came up in some sort of correlation between maybe the Carl Lentz situation, probably a little bit of pastors in sneakers, that whole account that, I mean, like the whole, just this idea that within Christendom, there are these pastors that people look up to, like a Mike Todd or a Furtick or a Lentz that are really, really well known, and how that actually trickles down and affects the larger church in general. And it not only just affects the church, but affects how the church outside, which I think is really what preachers and sneakers like tapped into, like how it affects even people outside of the church, and how people view that. The church having these individuals that they hold up really high in some regards, but are pretty blatantly like crazy rich. I mean, Joel Osteen being the most prominent of those, but obviously everybody else kind of falls. There's a lot more than him.
Yeah.
So the question is, though, the main question is, can a celebrity pastor, quote unquote celebrity, well known, I guess you could also put it in there, can somebody like that remain humble? And do we have examples of that? That was really a lot of the conversations I had with people in this regard. And I think it is possible. I think it really goes back to, I mean, we talked about 2 episodes ago about, the qualifications for elder and what that looks like. And I think if those qualifications are met, a pastor's heart is going to be one of those that says, okay, well, I'm well known. How can I utilize this platform? Not, I'm really well known. Let's see how many people I can get to listen to me, if that makes sense. I think there's a whole difference there. And I pointed out, when I've talked to this with people, I've pointed out people like Paul Washer, for example. I think for me, he stands out as kind of the most predominant of these guys that is well known. But if you look at his ministry, like it's so scaled down in regards to like, he doesn't want, like the dude just got on Instagram. But I think, again, the reason he did that seems to be so that people can know about missions and how to fund missions. Like it's not him being like, yo, my tips for the day. Like he approaches it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that Paul Washer would begin with, and if you asked him that question, is, well, I'm not a pastor. But
that's a good point.
But he is a really good. I actually have a YouTube video sermon of his saved and downloaded, and I listen to it. I mean, not like every week, but I listen to it every so often, because it's like, it really helps ground. And I think his audience in that sermon was he was preaching at a seminary. I'm assuming, based on the context, it was probably the master's seminary. But anyway, he one of the most powerful things that he does in that sermon is he begins to talk about how we look at so many men, whether it's on YouTube or whatever, we look at so many people and say, what a great man of God. And to which he responds with, there's no such thing as a great man of God. There are just feeble, weak-minded men that God uses. That's it, that a great God uses. And I think if that's your mindset, then you can have 15 million followers on this, that, or the other thing. And the thing that you're going to continually be saying to them is, look, I suck and God is big. Yeah. I mean, like mm-hmm. that's the message that, and I think that the celebrity pastors who have fallen, or whatever you want to call it, this is a tough subject, man, because so like the Carl Lentzes, like that, some of these guys I look at and go, I'm not really sure you're a pastor, and you might be the one in 2 Timothy, Paul is saying, like, you were hired to tickle the ears of the people who go to your church, right? Because you say things that are nice. But you could say, you could use people like Driscoll, right? Who was big time celebrity pastor. You could use people like Chandler, who's still what I would consider a celebrity pastor. Mm-hmm. So there are guys that that I wouldn't put in the same category as Carl Lentz or some of these other guys, uh, but I think it always boils down to what's your pride situation like, right? And there are pastors who have their Facebook friends are the 45 people in their church and their family, right? And that's it. They don't know, there's no celebrity whatsoever, but they have a ridiculously divisive and toxic pride issue. And then you have the opposite of that. You have people who have all kinds of MacArthur said once that he his philosophy has he's tried to keep it. I'm going to let God worry about I'm going to worry about the depth of my ministry and let God worry about the breadth of it.
Ooh,
Right.
that's a good quote. Yeah.
Right. It's a super good quote. And I think, hey, everybody, my alarm is going off. Just so you know, we're in the 3rd episode, and this is when I normally wake up on Wednesday. All right.
He's doing so much for you guys.
Yeah. So I need more followers. No, I'm just kidding. So I think there's actually, though, there's a story in Acts that I'm not going to read it necessarily, but that lends itself to this. And it's when Paul and Barnabas, so Paul does this amazing thing. Paul is preaching and speaking, and he heals somebody, right? He heals the guy. He says, stand up right on your feet. And he sprang up and began walking. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices and they began to worship Paul and Barnabas was Zeus and Paul, like they begin to worship them as gods, right? Which frankly is what celebrity pastor, that's what it is, right? We become disciples of Matt Chandler rather than follow Matt Chandler as Matt Chandler follows Christ, right? Which is what Paul says. So anyway, that aside, these guys begin to just worship Paul and Barnabas because this great miracle. And why would you not in their situation, like and with their beliefs? Why would you not automatically go, oh my gosh, wow,
something's happening,
Zeus, right? So Thor, but you Paul's and Barnabas, like the response from them is one of just like utter humility. Like, no, you let me show you the real God, right? Like we're just dudes, and the amazing thing that you just saw is just an avenue. All it is an avenue that God has opened up for me to show you who He is.
Yeah.
Right? If my ministry and my attitude is formed around my gifts and my talents, and look at me and Furtick and his camera angles and whatever else, right? Then of course,
got some nice camera angles
centered on you, right? Of course, it's going to be centered on you, right? And of course, then you're going to run into some real struggles and pride issues and whatever else.
Yep.
But if the only thing that you do with that platform is to go, no, guys, I'm so glad that everyone has, Peter at Pentecost, I'm so glad there are 3,000 people here. But that whole tongues thing that you saw, it wasn't drinking. It was just something that God did to show you who God is, right? It has nothing to do with me. Yeah,
no, and that's good. I think that's where it's really easy, I think, when we're talking about, celebrity pastors or well-known pastors, it's really easy to point out, like, the whole list of the guys that are just bad and hate on them all day long. That's super easy on both sides, right? So you'll have one side hating on Furtick and, Todd and all those guys. And then you'll have the other side hating on like the MacArthurs and the Sproul. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, look at that guy. I think what it does come down to, and that's what you pointed out, the core of it here isn't like technically any pastor or any Christian could be functioning under that same celebrity pastor-ish mentality as soon as you say, hey, people are listening to me. Like, yeah, I got all the knowledge. And I'll just be frank, right? So there's been times on my account that I've really, like, my wife is a wonderfully humbling source in this regard. And when she's just like, yeah, no, it's Instagram, right? That's all it is. Like, it doesn't, your opinion matters just as much as it did, yes, 4 years ago as it does now. And so it's one of those things where, I mean, there is a point where you have to go like, okay, where am I, like, what am I using this thing for? And I think as pastors, we have to be careful of that, because there are pastors that I know that they've left a church and people follow them. So they're like, yeah, I'm really wise. I'm really smart. I'm really influential. Like, and you can, like, I've seen that affect people's lives. I've had to fight that in my own life. I think there's a point where we all have to be like, we all have to, whether it's 5 people or 5,000 or 500,000, there's a point in everybody's life where it's really easiest for me, like, oh, look at that doofus. They're dumb. And then, we don't recognize that in our own life, we do the same thing with the 5, 10, 20 people that we have. And we're just as prideful. We just don't have such a magnifying glass on us to show that.
Yeah.
So I think, like, can a celebrity pastor be humble, or can a well-known pastor be humble? I think the obvious answer is yes, but I think that same applicability applies to us, or the pastor in the town that's got a sizable church. Or I think it comes down to, we all have to say, okay, how are we using the platform that we do have? Right? Are we trying to be like, look how smart I am? Because it's like our human inclination to be like, people are listening and people are following. I must be really smart. like I must be the wisest individual in the land, or the pastor that has their church growing. I mean, I've heard of pastor, I think Platt said this at one point, where, like, when his book Radical was doing really well, like, he had it in his head, was like, oh wow, yeah, this is doing great. And he said, as soon as he started thinking, I'm doing pretty good, his prayer life fell off, his devotional life fell off, because he was relying on that and not the Lord. And he said there was a real, having to refocus that, because I think it's all of our lives, wherever. It's really easy to rely on the Lord when there's no affirmation coming from anybody else, because that's all he's all we've got. And it's really easy to not do that when you're having all this affirmation and all of this, patting on the back from other people. So it's not really about the person, right? So, a Mike Todd or a Furtick or a Sproul or a MacArthur, that's going to make or break that opportunity. It's that humbleness that you have in the Lord, saying, okay, what am I doing with this influence? And I love what you said. You're just like, I'm just some dude that he's using to do this thing. Like that. That's all this is. Because you're right? The disciples, Paul could have easily been like, all right, who wants to line up today? Right? Yeah. And it's going to knock you over.
Who wants some anointing?
Yeah. I mean, right? In a non-humble, I mean, there's what was the story where the magician was like, hey, how much for that? Right? I mean, that's right. The whole idea is that not wielded in a humble way, any of us could be, that celebrity pastor in which we're like, let me influence you in this direction because I'm so smart. And I think that's really that's where that humbleness comes in.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think it really comes down to humility and pride, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a fight for every human being regularly.
Yeah.
I think
on the daily.
I think what you said earlier really hits it on the button, in that, like that comment that you made about them, like, we just don't have the magnifying glass on us. Mm-hmm. That's the only difference. I've like I said earlier, I've had I've known church leaders, pastors, whatever, who are incredibly prideful people, and who are either unaware or don't care. Mm-hmm. And then you have the people with a massive platform who are just wonderful people to be around, and super giving and super, like generous with, I think I think about it like this. If like in the story that I just talked about from Acts, right? and all the other, right? Like Paul, even the most prideful thing that you hear, I think, from Paul is when he says follow me as I follow Christ, right? And it sounds like, woo, super disciple, right? If you just read it off the cuff, but he's even then he's saying only follow me as I'm following Christ, right? This whole thing boils down to, at the very bottom of it, it all boils down to, who am I about?
Yeah.
Am
Well,
I
and like,
about me, or am I about God? And if my view of God is as it should be, is so massive, right? And he is just so out of this world, indescribably amazing and big and powerful and righteous and holy and mighty and all the stuff, right? If that's God, then how, and if that's constantly in my view, then how could I not direct every praise that comes to me? How could it not go directly back to him, verbally, as people are saying, hey, great job today, hey, whatever, man, I mean, and we all fail at that, right? Like, I don't want to make the case that, like, if that's not you all the time, then, repent or believe, like, but it is something. It's a constant repentance almost within. Do I walk up on Sunday mornings to stand behind that pulpit and proclaim the word of God, to get pats on the back afterward, to get the verbal back rub afterward, or is it terrifying? Not because I'm bad at it, or it's a difficult task, because public speaking is not hard for me, but this is hard, because it's weighty, because I'm just me, and I have a mirror, and I know me better than everybody else, and there's nothing here to be worshipped. Like nothing.
And I think, well, what you said there, right? So when Paul talks about, follow me as I follow Christ, and it's all about the message, that's why he can say that. But also in Galatians says that if I come with a different message, you don't listen to me then.
Or even an angel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Where it gets down to the point, like, it's not about the person delivering it, which I think is where that whole angel thing ties back. It's not about the person delivering it. It's about what's being said. I mean, that's the core of it, right? So that's why he can hold those two things in tension, to where you can get up and tell your church, right? Like, here's, if I preach anything different than this, please fire me next week. Like that's the idea, that I don't, it's about the central tenet of what the gospel is. And if we go off of that, then first of all, I don't deserve to be listened to anyway. This is just a gift that God's given. But if by any means I go off of this, and it can be gone. And I think, again, we get really held up sometimes with this whole, people saying, well, this person speaks so well, they're so enlightened, and what I love to do is, like, find those random pastors on the internet that literally have like 75 people following their church account, and like no one's ever going to hear about them or never hear from them, and just listen to a sermon and be like, I did it actually this week, where there was this old man that was preaching on Hosea, from Hosea, and his sermon was like amazing. And I was like, man, like, I think the video had like 800 views over 2-year time. And I'm like, more people need to hear this sermon. Like, it was so good. Then I think we get so held up on some people be like, no, listen to this guy. It was so good. It was so enlightening. It was so helpful. And you're just like, yeah, but like, what was the message about though? Like, what did he talk about? And that's the difference. The humility part is the whole thing. Like, in that sermon I'm talking about with this dude that like nobody ever heard of, I don't even know if it's still alive. It was this, you could tell in this message that not only did it hit him, he was humble in delivering it. And that's the key right there, is that you could tell that he knew that he was like, he's no better than anybody he's preaching to, but he wants them to know the message of the gospel, and that humility comes through to where that's the make or break point, right? Anybody can be put in a position to where the message you preach or the book you put out like propels you into a space, what do you do after that though? And if that character hasn't been developed up to that point, I mean, I think a great example that's not connected to pastoring, right, is like if you, and you wouldn't know this because you've already told me that you don't know musicians, but like Bieber will talk about like when he was a kid, he got projected into this space that was where he could get anything he wanted, and he was a
Disney guy, right?
I think
Something
honestly
like
it was I think it was Usher that got a hold of Bieber. I'm not sure, but
so
the whole thing was. Yeah, it was a music thing where he gets and I don't know the whole story. I just know bits and pieces of it. But he gets propelled into this space where he can literally have anything he wants. But he's a kid and doesn't have those built-in things to where, you know, it's this discernment of, do I actually want to do this? And when you're handed that as a Christian and you don't have humility built in, and everybody's going, oh, you're so wise, you're so smart, I want your advice on all of these minuscule things, then there's this, if you're not humble and it hasn't been built in, then you become a glorified self-help speaker, which, I mean, you can see that trajectory in some pastors that have big platforms, that it's not even about the gospel anymore. It's about how to run your business better, how to manage your money better. And it's just like, you have totally lost the whole point of what got you to where you are.
Yeah.
And again, I think it comes back to that. And again, not to use Paul Washer as some, you know, poster boy for this, because he would hate that. I'm sure.
Which is the point.
Which is the point. But it's this idea that you can see from that moment that he preached that, what is that, shocking youth sermon or whatever it's titled on YouTube all the time, right? Is that, yeah, but past that, like he could have easily used that to project himself into this big name guy. And all you see is after that is just like him living in a cabin in the woods with his family doing missions work. Like it wasn't like, oh yeah, we can. And I'm sure the way the Christian industry works, I'm sure he got a bunch of book deals and a bunch of offers and all this other stuff. And he's never talked about any of that, but I mean, how the system works, I guarantee you that's what happened.
Yeah.
And he had the choice of either to, you know, how to handle what God had put in his lap. And, if you listen to any sermon that man preaches, it's full of this humility. And again, not that he's the poster boy, but it just gives us a tangible example to see kind of what was happening, I think, probably in the early church with these apostles that were just like, it's not me. Like, it's what Jesus is doing.
And the one, so I talk about like at the bottom of it, it's pride. Who's it about? Is it about me? But the thing even behind that, right, the how to get there and how to stay there kind of thing, is I heard in a Paul Washer sermon, but
sorry, Paul,
I think it was in the same one I was talking about earlier, but there's a point when he's talking to these seminary soon to be graduates, I think, and or maybe it was a freshman class just come, I don't know, but regardless of that, he says to them, great, so you're gonna have this degree, right? How many hours or days do you think that you've spent in the past 4 years or 3 years just studying the attributes of God, right? And then he goes on with that idea in that quote, but the whole idea behind it is, if you know God, like really know him, and not just as the big thumbs up, Jesus is my best friend statue, right? But it's one thing to know the gospel, right, and to believe in Christ and to be a Christian, and it's another thing entirely to have had that journey where you begin to see how big God is, and how like indescribably big God is, which makes the gospel all the more amazing and powerful. And oh my gosh, why would he do this? And the more that you know who God is, studying his attributes, just who he is, and then couple that with the fact that he sent his son to die, it's hard for it to be about you if you know who God is.
Oh yeah.
Like that's the point, you know?
Good deal. All right. So I think after all of that, the only reasonable thing for you guys to do is follow us on social media. No, so guys, hopefully that was clear.
We got to end this. I got to get to my fan mail.
That clarified a few things. It was helpful.
No, it's just a bill. Never mind.
It's a stupid electric company. They want my autograph. I'm so important. So I hope that was helpful to see that it's not just about, hey, look at all these guys and, you know, how popular these people are. That affects you too as an individual. And I think oftentimes we can disconnect ourselves from that by pointing it toward the people that are well known and totally forget about ourselves and how that can fall back on us. So guys, thank you for liking, following, subscribing, all of those things that are very helpful to getting this podcast out to other people. So we appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Boy.